All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into something that seems so simple, but it's actually incredibly deep. What is money? I mean, it's this thing that pretty much runs our lives, right? But as you'll see, it's really more of a shared story we all agree on than some physical object. So we're going to trace that story all the way from the earliest trades right up to the code sitting in our digital wallet. Yeah, this quote? It just nails it right from the start. Whether you're talking about a shell, a metal coin, or a line of code on a screen, money's real power comes from just one place: our collective belief in it. It's not a resource like water or wood. It's a technology, and it's built completely on trust. Okay, so to really get our heads around why money even exists, we've got to do a little thought experiment. Let's imagine a world with no money at all, a world where every single transaction was a direct trade, a system we call bartering. So the biggest problem with bartering is this thing economists call the double coincidence of wants. I know, it's a fancy term, but it boils down to something super simple and frustrating. For any trade to happen, you have to find someone who has exactly what you want, and at the same time, they have to want exactly what you've got. You can probably see why this makes trying to trade anything a huge, inefficient headache. Okay, so let's make this real. Imagine you're this amazing axe maker. You're super proud of your axes. And what you really want is some mammoth meat. Well, you find a mammoth hunter, but oops, he doesn't need an axe. Or, maybe he does, but he thinks his mammoth meat is worth two of your axes. And just like that, the whole deal falls apart. In a barter system, trade is slow, it's complicated, and honestly, a lot of the time, it's just plain impossible.
What's really interesting is that we don't have just one story for how money started. We've actually got two competing theories. The classic idea, which goes all the way back to Aristotle, is that money was just invented to make all that clunky bartering easier. But there's a more recent theory from the anthropologist David Graeber, and he suggests it actually started as a form of credit. A way for small communities to keep track of social debts, like I owe you one, long before any physical coins were being passed around.
So, whichever way it started, society clearly needed a better system. And the first huge breakthrough was creating a standard, physical form of value that everyone could recognize: the coin. Now, the idea of using metal for currency didn't just pop up overnight. It evolved. Way back in 1100 BC, the Chinese were using these cool little miniature bronze tools as a kind of currency. But the real game changer, that came around 700 BC. That's when we start seeing the first stamped coins showing up in Lydia, which is modern-day Turkey, but also in India and China around the same time. The key moment, though, the one we're highlighting here, is 600 BC. That's when King Alyattes of Lydia mints the world's first official government-guaranteed currency. A huge step. And these Lydian coins were absolutely revolutionary. Why? Well, for a start, they were made of electrum. That's a natural mix of gold and silver. Then they were stamped with an emblem, maybe a lion's head, which was basically a seal certifying their weight and their value. But the critical innovation, the thing that changed everything, was the guarantee from the state. This created widespread trust, and that trust supercharged Lydia's economy, helping to make it one of the wealthiest empires of the ancient world.
And speaking of the state and currency, here's a great little piece of word history for you. The ancient Romans set up their coin-making workshop, their mint, in the temple of the goddess Juno Moneta. And her name, Moneta, is the direct root of our modern words money and mint.
Kind of cool, right? This whole system introduces a really crucial concept. A coin now has two different kinds of value. You've got the commodity value, that's just the value of the actual metal inside the coin, but then you have the specie value, that's the official face value, the amount guaranteed by the government stamp. And that gap, that little bit of space between the physical material and the abstract value, that's what allows money to take its next giant leap. For centuries, coins were king. But let's be real, carrying around big bags of metal is heavy and it's risky. So the next evolution of money required an even bigger level of trust, moving to a simple promise, printed on paper.
Now here's something that might surprise you. If you assumed paper money was a European invention, you'd be off by about 1,000 years. It actually first showed up way back in 7th century China during the Tang Dynasty. See, merchants who were making these huge deals got tired of lugging around massive, heavy strings of coins. So they just started trading paper receipts instead. Much easier.
Over in Europe, a really similar process happened just much, much later. And it all started with goldsmiths, who were basically the world's first bankers. Merchants would deposit their gold with a goldsmith to keep it safe, and they'd get a paper receipt in return. Pretty soon, people figured out it was way easier to just trade the convenient paper receipts instead of constantly going back to the goldsmith to get the heavy gold. And this is the magic step. Eventually, the paper promise itself became the money. The receipt was the currency. Of course, this whole leap to paper money relied completely on trust. Trust that the system was secure, and trust that the promise on the paper would always be honored. So, to enforce that trust, the authorities took counterfeiting very seriously. This warning, found on an early Chinese banknote, makes that point, well, brutally clear.
Okay, so the jump from physical metal to a piece of paper was a huge leap in abstraction. The next step, it would take money out of the physical world entirely.
For most of modern history, paper money was what we call representative. It was a stand-in for a physical amount of gold or silver sitting in a vault somewhere. But that all changed in one specific year, 1971. That's when President Nixon went on TV and announced that the US dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. In that single moment, the last formal link between our money and any physical commodity was cut.
And that decision, it pushed us fully into the era of fiat money. The word fiat actually comes from Latin, and it means let it be done. So fiat money has value simply because a government says it has value, because they declare it to be legal tender. Its value comes entirely from our trust in the stability of that government. It is the ultimate expression of that idea we started with. Money is purely a shared belief.
So just how abstract has money become? I mean, really, look at this chart. Even back in 2012, over half of all transactions by value were purely electronic. And today, that number is way, way higher. The vast majority of money in the world isn't cash in your wallet or coins in a jar. It's just digital ones and zeros in bank computer systems. And that brings us right up to today, to our final chapter, and to a brand new technology that's challenging the very definition of what money is, and maybe more importantly, who should get to control it. This, of course, is the world of cryptocurrency. It all started back in 2009 with Bitcoin, and these currencies are a fundamentally new kind of money. The key difference? They're decentralized. That means they're not controlled by any single government or bank. Instead, they exist on a shared, public ledger that we call a blockchain, and the whole thing is secured by some incredibly powerful cryptography. For people who are big believers in crypto, the appeal is a financial system that exists outside of traditional control, one with potentially lower fees and greater privacy. But what I find most fascinating is how it all comes back to that core issue we've been tracking this whole time. For all its high-tech complexity, crypto is built on trust, just like every single currency that came before it. The only difference? Now, the trust isn't being placed in a king or a bank. It's being placed in the integrity of the computer code itself.
So think about this journey, from a simple axe trade to Lydian coins to Chinese paper, and now to decentralized code. The form that money takes is constantly changing. It's always evolving, but its fundamental function has always been the same. It is a story that we all agree to believe in. So the only real question left is, what story will we decide to tell next?